Folks, guess what? It is I, your favorite host, Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock. Well, let me rephrase that. This is Kenneth the K-Rock Klein, the host of Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock. And for the first time in the year 2025, I got you a podcast. Yes, that's right, folks. We got a real banger of a podcast, and I'll tell you what. Man, so far, 2025 has been a real interesting year to this point. I mean, well, when I say interesting, I mean there's been some good things, but it's really been off to a shocking start. I mean, we had the unfortunate event that took place in New Orleans where 10 people, lost their lives and 30 people were injured after someone drove a truck right over through people. I mean, it's really hard to talk about it and all. And they were calling it a terrorist attack and everything. And I want to sympathize. And first off, I want to, give my thoughts and prayers again to the people of the city of New Orleans and also to the victims and their families after such a horrific event that took place. And it's really hard to kind of process everything and all that. And also, the thing that also made me mad about it was that the guy that actually committed the act was living in Houston at the time. And it really burns me up thinking about it because, I always thought that Houston and New Orleans had a real good relationship. You think back to when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, we had people in Houston that helped out, welcomed citizens to the city or to Houston and all as a way to, kind of spend time there after, while things were happening in New Orleans. And then, it was sort of a vice versa event. New Orleans helped us out after Hurricane Harvey. So I always thought we had a really good relationship between the two cities. And this is just one of those things that kind of puts a little damper on it. But, it was unfortunate that that this was an act that was committed. And it was really, it's really sad thinking about it and everything. But obviously I have great love and admiration for the city of New Orleans. My parents actually, before they moved to Houston, they lived in New Orleans for a couple of years. And so a real devastating event that took place to start the year. And of course, the NFL playoffs are set to continue on. And we're going to talk about the NFL playoffs. I'm going to give my predictions on what I think is going to happen in the wild card rounds and everything. But, there's just been a lot of crazy stuff that's happened. And yet, today, folks, I want to start my podcast by discussing a scandal that has broken out in the sports world. But unlike recent scandals of years past, this one involves the sports media, particularly with Fox Sports 1. Somehow, some way, there is a massive, there's some serious trouble with Fox Sports. A former employee has sued the organization, and also a couple of people, particularly one Skip Bayless, and yeah, it's a real bad one, folks. And I'm going to be discussing that in this podcast as well. And I'm also going to be talking about the NFL playoffs, as I said. So we're going to be getting right into all of that. Before I move on, though, let me remind everyone that this is Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock. I'm, of course, the host of the podcast. And this is a podcast where you can listen to it on Podbean and Spotify, and I also upload it to my YouTube channel at KWCLINE91. I like to spell it out just because people might get my last name confused of Klein, because a lot of times when you think of the name Klein, you see Kline, but my last name is actually Cline, which is kind of the rare version of Klein. So yeah, go figure with that. But anywho, we're going to step aside, folks, and when we come back, we're going to be discussing this recent bombshell of a lawsuit that has been thrown on Fox Sports 1. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back. As I said, we are officially underway in 2025, and it has been off to a banger of a start. And let me tell you what, folks, this story that I had just learned, and that's being talked about all over, is got to be one of the most craziest and insane stories that has been brought about. And this, of course, involves a lawsuit that has been filed by a Nushin Faraji, who was a former FS1 employee. She was a hairstylist, and she's suing FS1, its outlets, so Fox Sports, Fox, FS2, like all these other Fox-related stuff. And then, of course, you have the Executive Vice President of Content, Charlie Dixon, Skip Bayless, and Joy Taylor. I mean, folks, oh my gosh. The fact that Skip Bayless is even in this lawsuit, and yet when you find out the reasons why he's in this lawsuit, you have no other choice but to hate this man even more. And I'm going to get into why Skip Bayless is in the lawsuit in just a moment. But folks, let me tell you the story about Nushin Faraji and why she has certain other people in this lawsuit. So, Nushin Faraji, a former FS1 employee, started working for the company in 2012, and she was working there as an intern, but then 4 years later, I think she got promoted in 2016, so she's now working full-time. And around this time, she meets a woman by the name of Joy Taylor, who, as we all know, is one of the FS1 hosts of the TV shows. Now, Joy Taylor had previously moved to Los Angeles from Miami. She didn't have a regular position at the company, FS1, but would often fill in for the hosts whenever they were unavailable to be on the shows that they were running. And the two women, they start a conversation, and Faraji finds out that Joy Taylor was married, but her husband was still living in Miami while she was all alone in Los Angeles. This is a red flag, ladies and gentlemen. This is about to be a crazy one. And, I mean, you guys already know where this is going, but let me fill you in on the details on what's going on. So, Taylor and Faraji, in May of 2016, they meet up for drinks in Santa Monica along with an older man by the name of Charlie Dixon, who is the Executive Vice President of Content. Now, he's responsible for overseeing all the content and the production within the organization. And this, of course, involves, helping out with future talents in a way. And Faraji at that time didn't know that. She didn't know that this elderly man that was with them was in fact Dixon. And when she asked Joy who he is, Joy says to her, "Oh, Dixon's just a friend and everything. Nothing to see it." So over time, these three continue to meet up, but over time, Faraji looks at the body language of both Taylor and Dixon, and she gets this feeling that, well, there's more to it. There's more than them being just friends. And she suspects that Taylor is sleeping with Dixon, but decides to keep the opinion to herself, which I think is very smart, because you don't want to make any false accusations, even if you are bothered by this. Come June of 2016, one day, Faraji goes to work, and lo and behold, she meets up with Dixon in an elevator. And she is surprised by this, because she thought that Dixon was just this friend, this person that her and Taylor continued to meet up with and serving all the drinks. So she goes to Joy and tells her, "Hey, I just saw that guy that pours down the drinks, and, like your friend, like, what's he doing here?" And Joy has to say, "You know what, here's the deal. This is Charlie Dixon, who's the Executive Vice President of Content and all that, and he's responsible for everything. And we're kind of having a secret relationship." Faraji is a little bit bothered by this, and she tells Taylor, "Well, here's the thing. I don't think it's a good idea for you to be in a relationship with Mr. Dixon, just because it could cause some serious problems." And Taylor's just like, "Don't worry about it, there's nothing to it, no problem whatsoever." So over time, Faraji continues to remain friends with Taylor, but tries to distance herself to get out of the dangerous situation, because she doesn't want that to happen. Now we fast forward to July of 2016. There's a new show that comes up. It's called Undisputed, and I'm sure we all are very familiar with that show. This is going to star Skip Bayless, a former newspaper reporter who worked in Dallas. He worked in Chicago, covering the Cowboys and the Chicago Bulls and other Chicago teams, and former NFL Hall of player and Hall of Famer Shannon Sharpe. So it was going to be one of those debate shows. It was going to be the equivalent of ESPN's First Take, which was also a show that Skip Bayless was on before he got hired by FS1. Now, Fox was looking for a woman with significant TV experience to be the host, to be the moderator of this show. And there were a number of good options, but as it turns out, everyone was pretty surprised that Taylor was the one that was picked, because she didn't have as much experience on TV. She was a former bartender in Miami and was also a radio host, so she had some experience, hosting shows, but she wasn't well known on camera, and everyone was very surprised by this. Needless to say, Skip Bayless was not too pleased with this, and this was something that he would later talk to Faraji about later on, and we'll get into Skip Bayless more in a bit. But Skip Bayless didn't like that. He expressed his feelings on it. Dinner is arranged between Skip Bayless and Joy Taylor, and this is where Joy Taylor comes in wearing provocative clothing. I'm not going to even picture what she was wearing then, but obviously this was a way to try to get, Skip Bayless to kind of approve of her and everything, just to try to win her over. It didn't work out that way. And so, Skip Bayless still is adamant about not having Joy Taylor on the show, but Dixon goes up to him and says, hey, here's the deal. You should just accept her. Just accept Joy Taylor. Just do me as a favor. And so Skip reluctantly agrees. Now we move on to August of 2016. And at this point, Taylor's the host of Undisputed. She's still with her husband, but she's also with Mr. Dixon. And one night, they're at dinner. You have Mr. Dixon, you have Miss Taylor, you have Miss Taylor's husband, and Faraji are all at a dinner. Now, Miss Taylor's husband suspected that there was a relationship brewing between Dixon and her, and sure enough, he finds out about it and ends up, divorcing Taylor. So he then wants to tell everyone what was going on, what was the reason for the divorce, but Mr. Dixon says, hey, listen, I'm going to pay you a lot if you keep your mouth shut. And needless to say, that's exactly what happened. So, Mr. Dixon ended up paying this man, and nothing is said more about that. There's obviously a lot more stuff that goes on during this time, but let me focus in on a few things that actually took place. Let's go to 2017. This is where Joy Taylor is having a birthday party, and Faraji is there. And this is where an incident takes place. Mr. Dixon actually forced himself on her. He grabs her in certain bad areas, which I don't want to get into. And Faraji is very bothered by this. She obviously doesn't know who to tell at the moment, but she recommended that, hey, Miss Taylor was sleeping with Mr. Dixon. I might as well go tell her about it. So she goes up there thinking that, Joy Taylor would be very shocked and very upset by this, that she would have a problem with that. Well, Joy Taylor surprises Faraji by saying, get over it. Get over it. And the only reason why you have a job is because of Mr. Dixon, and that I'm only recommending you to be my hairstylist and everything. And that can be taken away by Mr. Dixon. Wow. Wow. This is really shocking when you think about it. I mean, come on. Joy Taylor having a moment where she tells Faraji that the only reason why Faraji's working is because of Mr. Dixon and because Joy Taylor recommended her. Like, come on, really? That's a bit of a low blow, if you ask me. That's basically saying, you're not that good, but I'm only keeping you here because I want you personally, and Mr. Dixon may not like it, and he could take away your job any minute now. Well, Faraji, is taken aback by this, but suffice to say that, she ends up not saying anything. And this kind of continues going on for a while afterwards. But then, let's fast forward to February of 2020. This is where it gets crazy. In approximately February of 2020, Miss Taylor asked Miss Faraji to meet for lunch in Beverly Hills. When Miss Faraji arrives, she finds Miss Taylor with a man, not Mr. Dixon, but Emmanuel Acho, a former NFL player who is now one of the hosts of FS1's TV show, who used to have a series called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. And I gotta say, personally, I watched those and I thought those were really touching and very much enjoyable to watch, considering that this was around the time where we started to have all these race-related riots with the George Floyd situation and everything out there. But yeah, so by this point, Emmanuel Acho is starting to be recognized, for his work at FS1. Well, Miss Faraji had no idea who, Emmanuel Acho is, but could sense that there was some romantic tension between Joy Taylor and Emmanuel Acho. A few months after meeting Mr. Acho at lunch, Miss Faraji noticed him in a hallway while at work. She then asked Miss Taylor if Mr. Acho also worked at Fox. Miss Taylor confirms and explains that she wanted Mr. Acho to eventually recommend her on the show Speak for Yourself. Now at this point, Miss Faraji is becoming alarmed and warns Miss Taylor that it is not a good idea to sleep with both Mr. Dixon and Mr. Acho at the same time, as Mr. Dixon is a very powerful man that may become very angry. Well, suffice to say, Joy Taylor tells her not to worry about it. She explains, and folks, get ready for this. This is going to be the biggest bombshell, probably, unless you count Skip Bayless. But from Joy Taylor's perspective, this is about to be the biggest bombshell out there. She says that she was also now powerful, and the plan was that once Mr. Dixon was no longer useful to her, she would follow through and tell everyone in the company that he forced himself on her, and that she would not be allow herself to be forced out by Mr. Dixon like all the other female talent out there. Really? Really? You're going to Me Too yourself in that situation? You're going to Me Too Mr. Dixon? You're going to cancel him, try to get him that, when you were allegedly involved in this relationship? You allegedly made the decision to sleep with him? And oh yeah, you're sleeping with somebody else? Allegedly, these are allegations, people. These are not real facts. These have yet to be proven, but reading all these allegations, at least from Joy Taylor's perspective, that's a real bombshell. Like, the fact that there are some women out there that are willing to seduce these powerful men, to give them their own benefit, to make them to get promoted to higher authorities, higher levels, and then only to realize that they don't need those men anymore. So instead of just being open and honest and say, well, here's the reason why I got the promotion in the first place, they basically accuse the man and say, he put himself on me. And look, sexual harassment claims are to be taken very seriously. But what really troubles me here is that Joy Taylor, according to this lawsuit, is willing to seduce and then betray Mr. Dixon by saying that he forced himself on her when she was actually agreeing, going along with this in a way. That's almost like Delilah betraying Samson. Samson being seduced by Delilah, Delilah cutting off his hair, and then, of course, betraying him, which makes him weak, and then God knows what happened to Delilah afterwards. I hope that she either found forgiveness within herself, or she was there when Samson, chained to the pillars, destroyed the entire temples, and like everyone else, she was a victim in that case. I hope karma got to her in the Bible. I don't know if there's a thing as karma in the Bible. I'm sure there is. But this was a Delilah move that Joy Taylor was making. And obviously Faraji wasn't too pleased with this. And suffice to say, there were other factors that played into itself, but there was a falling out between Faraji and Taylor. And then Taylor has been accusing, being mean to Faraji. And then eventually Faraji gets fired in FS1. And you can understand why Faraji is very upset. But Joy Taylor isn't the only person that Faraji is suing. Skip Bayless is also being sued. Skip! Like, the guy that has a big hatred for LeBron James, that always says that it will be the Dallas Cowboys' year to win the Super Bowl. The guy that had to put up with all these terrible takes by himself. The guy that worked with Stephen A. Smith and Shannon Sharpe and supposedly was one of the big reasons why Shannon Sharpe was, left the company and is now working on ESPN. Like, Skip Bayless, do you see a pattern here with all that? Skip Bayless is trying so hard to make a name for himself that, look, what I'm about to tell y'all, again, these are allegations, but this is really shocking. What I'm reading here is from an article with all these allegations. There's a 42-page lawsuit about this, in case you want to find it. But Skip Bayless supposedly offers Faraji $1.5 million for sexual relations with him. According to Faraji's allegations, Bayless spent years making sexual advancements towards her. This included lingering hugs and kisses on the cheek while putting his body against hers and pressing against her breasts. During the normal course of Bayless's hairstyling, I might add, there was a haircut, and at one point, Bayless referred to Faraji as the word voluptuous. Now, let me stop the reading of this article by Awful Announcing, which, by the way, you can look at online or research it. It's a really good article. It's from Awful Announcing, written by Drew Lerner. 11 stunning accusations from the Fox Sports workplace misconduct lawsuits. Now, that's the article I'm reading it from. Now, voluptuous. The adjective voluptuous is used to describe someone who is attractive and curvy. Marilyn Monroe was known for her voluptuous figure. Being voluptuous means being full-figured and curvy, but this word doesn't only apply to body types. Now, folks, I'm just going to say, of all the words that Skip Bayless could have used, the fact that he used a word which I never would have imagined using on a woman, let alone any word, I would never say a word like that, but I didn't even know about this word until just now. And fortunately, I'm not the only one, because Faraji was not familiar with it, because English is her second language. And when she found out about it, you can imagine her reaction. She was pissed. Needless to say, this would continue to be a thing. Mr. Bayless started becoming a little bit more aggressive and direct in his advances, and Faraji, of course, continuously declined because she did not date at work, and she was a single mom, and she needed the job. Then, there was a situation in July of 2021 when Miss Faraji developed issues with her left ovary, and it was possible that it could be cancer. There was a biopsy that was scheduled, and she then explained the situation to Mr. Bayless, hoping that he would take pity on her and stop, putting himself on her. However, he tells her he wanted to be with her right then and there. Faraji panics and says that there's cameras everywhere and that she has a child. She does not want him. Mr. Bayless then grabs her hands, kisses them, and says, hey, how about this? I pay you $1.5 million to have sex. Faraji makes up an excuse to leave. And, there was all this stuff about Mr. Bayless, reading out his fantasies towards her and everything. Like, it's just ridiculous. Like, I can't even say it on a podcast. There's kids listening to this. Mommy, why is this guy talking about sex? What is sex and everything? Like, it's not a funny joke, people. I'm not laughing. I'm a little bit perturbed and bothered by what I'm reading here. But folks, it gets worse. There was a moment about a week later after Mr. Bayless, the whole incident about $1.5 million that Mr. Bayless offers. He tries another advance to Miss Faraji, and Miss Faraji, very upset, says, stop it, you have a wife. This is where it gets really ugly. Mr. Bayless makes a racial remark. He says, and I quote, Aren't you Muslim? Doesn't your dad have 3 to 4 wives? And Miss Faraji responded that her father was dead, and when Mr. Bayless looked taken aback, she made an excuse to leave. By this point, Miss Faraji had shut off another advancement, and this is Mr. Bayless, Skip that is, accuses her of having sexual relations with Shannon Sharp. Like, he accused her of having sexual relations with Shannon Sharp. I mean, this whole thing is getting ridiculous and so annoying. I mean, I see why we got this lawsuit. In fact, folks, I'm just going to stop right here because it is getting out of control with all these allegations. And look, I don't know what's true. I think some of these allegations are, maybe over exaggerated, or they're called into questions and everything. And I just don't know what to, believe, honestly. Because to tell you the truth, I don't really trust anyone in the mainstream media these days. I mean, there's a few, but a lot of people with what the state of mainstream media is, or at least sports media in general, it's insane. It is just so ridiculous how we are having all these people that, are putting themselves, we're having these powerful figures that, feel untouchable. They feel like they're in boss. And the only way that certain people are going to be promoted to the jobs that they want is if they spend one night with them. And this makes me sick to my stomach. I'm not showing it like, I don't want to come across as being rude and being upset, but let me tell you, folks, this is a scandal. This is some serious allegations that, if proven to be true, will have a huge major impact on the landscape of sports media in general. And not just from, people working in the organization, but we're talking about women in particular. Look, I believe women deserve to be in sports media. I mean, I believe we should have women inputs. A lot of people on social media is saying we shouldn't listen to women in sports media. Like, they get some of these dumb takes and everything. They should be back to the kitchen. Well, you know what? Screw you for that, thinking that way. My opinion is I think we deserve to have women because there are some women that are very intelligent with their knowledge. Mina Kimes is one of them. I have great respect for her. You may not always agree with her takes, but she is someone that has done a tremendous job in her career. Hannah Storm, that's one of my old-time favorites. She is someone that I used to love watching, and I still love watching her on ESPN when I get a chance to. But, someone that worked, that was a Houston person, or she didn't live in Houston, but she covered Houston sports teams during the 90s, particularly the Rockets when they were winning their 2 championships around this time. And, she worked on NBA on NBC. She's done a lot. I mean, she is someone that I really, enjoyed watching. Same thing with Linda Cohn, who was one of the first female sports center anchors that I had a bit of a crush on, and I was a young kid. I mean, come on, who didn't have a crush on Linda Cohn back in those days? But we're talking about a situation here where what Joy Taylor is being accused of doing is completely and utterly inexcusable, disgusting, and so shocking and so horrifying that my biggest concern is that for all the female reporters, those that want to be in the sports media industry, those that want to host shows, those that want to report on the sidelines, those that want to do everything to have a great career in the sports media industry, it's going to set them back 10 years. Because if you think about it, women that, in the early days when we were seeing women reporters, they had to overcome the sexism. They had to overcome all the jokes, that were made from them by the men. They had to prove that they were worthy of being in there. And we're seeing more and more of them in today's society. My biggest concern is that some women are playing a card which I don't think is the right card to play. Now, granted, I'm not saying that this is entirely true. I don't know, if this is true or not. I mean, we're going to hear more of this over time. But my biggest concern is that women are going to be held back because of the perception of why this is a case of why women shouldn't be in sports media. And I don't think it should be, because women, like what Joy Taylor is doing, seducing her way to the top, and then to backstab, potentially backstab the boss who you seduced, what you're being accused of here, to the top, it's going to look really bad on everybody. And this is just, this is ridiculous. And look, I don't know what's true out there, and I'm not really a huge Joy Taylor fan. I'm not necessarily saying that, this is entirely true. These are allegations again, but still, I'm very concerned and very worried that this will have a potential impact. Because look, I used to want to be a Sports Center anchor. Like, I used to want to be on Sports Center growing up as a kid. Like, I loved watching ESPN Sports Center, as all of us did. We loved watching Chris Berman. We loved watching Baseball Tonight. We loved watching all these Sports Center related activities. And yet, nowadays, I'm seeing with what's going on here in the sports world, and it's just insane. Like everything is so much about entertainment. It's all about competition. And people that obviously are, might not have a chance to make it to the sports media days, they're taking another outlet. They're doing podcasting just like I am. Now, granted, I'm not going to be the best podcaster, like the most recognizable, the most famous podcaster. There's no way I'm going to compete with Pat McAfee. It's going to take me years and years and years to catch up to that, and it still won't be enough to what Pat McAfee is doing at this moment. Now, I'm saying Pat McAfee because he's obviously, a former NFL player, and he's done a tremendous job with podcasting. But this is why I struggle with, being a sports media personality. As much as I would wish I could be, my biggest concern is with all that's being talked about, with all the people that are, being accused of, sexual harassment or anything, whether this is true or not. And again, I'm not saying that it is, because again, this is allegations, but if it is true, we got some serious problems. Folks, I don't know about you, but I am really, really disappointed and a little bit surprised. But then again, this is devastating. Now, what do I think is going to come out from this? Well, I don't know if you can punish Joy Taylor unless, because she's probably going to want to accuse someone, say that, well, she's got fired because, she was a woman and everything, and she's going to use those excuses, even though there's this lawsuit. Then again, I don't even know if this lawsuit is true. Maybe this is just a case where somebody got frustrated and felt, vilified and was wrongfully terminated. They felt that way, that they decided to throw this lawsuit together as a way to get revenge out of pettiness. Now, I don't know what's true or what's not. Obviously, I'm looking at this lawsuit, and it is really disappointing. It does seem like, for the time being, everything is going against Skip Bayless, and everything is going against Joy Taylor. And, I'm really sickened by Skip Bayless because of this, if this is true or not. And, this guy has an arrogant ego, and he's deluded at times. But this is more than a man that's deluded. This is, if proven to be true, this is somebody that has lost everything. Like, he's losing everything that he has worked so hard to gain, and he's on a downfall right now, and it's just going to continue to get worse and worse and worse. And if all this is true, I don't even know if he finds work ever again. Forget his show, forget what he's doing. All that he's worked hard for is going down the drain. And I don't think anybody would be surprised if he's not working in the sports media world again. He might at some point, but this is a really, really bad look for FS1 in particular. And, maybe there's a part of me that's glad that I'm not working for ESPN or FS1. And I'm not saying ESPN is involved in this lawsuit, because this is FS1 we're talking about here. But my thing is, working for, a big name company for an opportunity to promote yourself, I'm concerned that there's going to be people that are going to have to do certain things that they're not going to want to do to get themselves to where they want to go. And that's unfortunately going to have some major impacts as far as, society these days. Because, guys, we shouldn't be sexualizing everybody. We shouldn't. Women deserve to be in the sports media industry, but there's no way around it. Like, you have to be very careful, be very respectful, but sometimes I just worry that everybody that is trying to do it the right way is going to get passed over because A, someone that is better looking, more attractive than they are is going to get a lot of views, or B, you're not going to get that opportunity because you had an opportunity to pass or to be promoted. All you had to do was do X, Y, and Z, which is totally against your beliefs. And, that's the big problem. This is about as big of a scandal, and to this point, it's all allegations, it's all talk, and we haven't heard much from anybody. I mean, Shannon Sharp, who was kind of mentioned in the lawsuit, denies it, but he wasn't being sued. He wasn't the one that was being sued. He just happened to be mentioned in the lawsuit, and it's just been, I don't know what else to tell you. It is just so frustrating and so upsetting to hear this. Yeah, so clearly what we have here is a case that an organization is taking some big time hits. And there's going to be more of this coming out, I feel. And I don't know what the outcome is going to be. My guess is there's probably going to be some settlements, and everyone might continue to work, but they'll have a scar on their head. And that's just the way life is sometimes. And it's really disappointing to hear that as well. But that's why it kind of disgusts me with the way sports media is going about these days. Like, it's no longer just about doing some research, giving out fair, honest points. It's about, entertainment, doing something to put for ratings. I mean, it's the same thing with society these days. We have all these TikTok people. We have all these folks that are, having an enjoyable time. And, they're making money. They're making more money than I am, and yet they're not doing anything other than just posting some content out on their social media. Look, I'm trying to put some content out there, but I know I'm probably not going to have that opportunity unless I get a fortunate break. But that's just my 2 cents about this whole thing. It's a real disaster going on in FS1, and this is something that they're going to have to deal with for a while at least. But speaking of dealing with for a while, we're going to be talking about the NFL playoffs on our next segment. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back. All right, everyone. It is time to get ready because the NFL playoffs are here. And folks, I got to tell you what, I'm looking at all these matchups and man, we got some real good games out here. This is going to be some exciting games to watch, and I cannot wait to see what happens in each one of these games as well. Now, of course, the two teams that have byes, the Kansas City Chiefs and the Detroit Lions, they get to sit back, relax, and get themselves healed up. And yeah, that could be a potential Super Bowl matchup. The Kansas City Chiefs and the Detroit Lions. Hey, I think that would be a great Super Bowl matchup. I think it would to see the Chiefs and the Lions. The Lions are the America's team, while the Chiefs are America's most hated for reasons that we all know, but I won't get into that moments as well. But of course, those two teams will have to wait for their games as well. So we'll get into those potential matchups later on in just a moment or another time for another podcast as well. But right now, folks, we are going to kick it off with the wild card round. And we're going to start with the NFC because I tell you what, it's going to be real interesting to see how everything plays out. So, first up, we have the Philadelphia Eagles and the Green Bay Packers. This has been one of the most commonly used playoff matchups of all time. The Eagles and the Packers meeting each other historically. And I want to say all time that the Packers have beaten the Eagles at least once. Yes, this is a fourth meeting all time between the two teams. The Eagles have won twice, once in 1960 in the NFL championship game, the other in 2003, well, technically 2004, but it was the divisional game. That was the game in which the Eagles converted a 4th and 26 from Donovan McNabb to Freddie Mitchell that kept their season alive. And of course, the Eagles would tie the game with a field goal, and then they would go on to win in overtime after Brett Favre threw another costly interception. Not the first time he's done that, and certainly won't be the last. But moving right along here, this matchup to me is probably going to be interesting because we had Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles all season long. They were expected to be a very good team, but for a while there, the Eagles were being threatened by an up-and-coming Washington Commanders team, and at one point, the Commanders were actually in first place of the NFC East, and everyone's wondering what's going on with the Eagles, what's happening. There seemed to be some tension between Jalen Hurts and the wide receiver, A.J. Brown, so a lot of people are been wondering what was wrong with the Eagles, but then over time, Philadelphia seemed to get themselves back on track. And eventually, they finished with the second best record in the NFC. Now, they're taking on the Green Bay Packers, who enter the season looking to make another big step. And that's the thing with the NFC North. Like, you have 3 teams in the NFC North, which is the most out of everyone in all of the NFC. The only team that didn't make it, of course, the Chicago Bears, but that was not a great year for the Bears in that regards as well. So the Green Bay Packers, who are looking to maybe make the next step forward, but hey, a little bit of history for you folks. Last year, the Green Bay Packers were the 7th seed, and they took on the Dallas Cowboys, and they became the first 7th seed ever to knock off a number 2 seed in the playoffs, and that was not a great time to be a Cowboys fan if you were a Dallas Cowboys fan, which, first of all, you're nuts, and second of all, yeah, I have nothing else to say to you other than next year. But anyway, so looking at this matchup, this game's going to be played in Philadelphia. And, the one concern for the Eagles is Jalen Hurts, who's currently in concussion protocol. Is he going to be able to get himself healthy? Because clearly this is definitely, this is going to be a big factor. And I am a little curious to see whether or not he is able to get himself back in the game and play as well, because I feel like he's the guy that runs the offense for the Eagles, and it certainly will have a massive impact on the game itself. So, depending on whether or not Jalen Hurts plays or not, which I'm hoping that he can play, this could be a legitimate opportunity for the Green Bay Packers to knock off Philadelphia and prove that being the 7th seed doesn't mean you're going to lose to a number 2 seed, as they did last year as well. But the way I look at it, I think it'll be a very close game. Like the last time these two teams met was obviously in week 1 when the Eagles won 34-29. And Saquon Barkley, who I wish could have gone for the record for most rushing yards in a single season, just to stick it to Eric Dickerson, but he chose to sit out, and that was just, I mean, it's a really costly decision in my personal opinion. Look, I understand you want to stay healthy and be fresh for the playoffs, but man, you could have at least had a chance to make some history with that regard. But with that being said, as far as my predictions are concerned for this one, I think it's going to be an Eagles victory. It won't be a blowout, as some people are probably saying, pending, of course, how Jordan Love plays, but it also depends on how Jalen Hurts plays. But I think Philadelphia gets this one. So Philadelphia moves on to the second round. Then we got Tampa Bay and Washington. Now, Tampa Bay, of course, is the number 3 seed. They're taking on Washington, and this will be the first playoff game for rookie Jaden Daniels, who arguably is the rookie of the year this season, and he has done a tremendous job, almost duplicating the season that C.J. Stroud had last year. Now, this, of course, being his first playoff game, he's facing a Tampa Bay team that has Baker Mayfield at quarterback, has Mike Evans, who just made history with his 11th straight 1,000-yard receiving season. So this is going to be an interesting game. This is going to be a game that I think could make or break both these two teams. Like, if the Buccaneers win, they will move on, and they might have an opportunity to get one step closer to the NFC. But if the Commanders win, this would be a very successful season for Washington, because Washington, for most of their at least most of the 21st century, has not had something to cheer about. They've been held hostage by a former owner, Dan Snyder, who is no longer running the team. And it's going to be real interesting to see how Jaden Daniels fares in his first playoff game. That's the thing. You have a great rookie quarterback in, Jaden Daniels, but he might have some struggles in his second year. We'll wait and see on that. And then he's going up against, Baker Mayfield and the Buccaneers. I mean, this is a remarkable story. I think a lot of people want to see the Washington Commanders win just so they can move on and be real exciting to have it. I think this will be a very close game in hindsight when you look at it. And Jaden Daniels could be in a position to win the game, but I'm not sure if he'll be able to, get the team over the top. So, therefore, I'm picking the Buccaneers to win. So, I got Philadelphia going up against Tampa Bay. Now we go to the last game. I'm talking, of course, about the Los Angeles Rams and the Minnesota Vikings. Now, the Minnesota Vikings have been one of the biggest stories of the season. Like, earlier in the year, everyone was concerned because the Vikings had drafted a franchise quarterback in J.J. McCarthy, and not even before he plays, he goes down with an injury. They bring Sam Darnold in, and Sam Darnold has played like a potential MVP candidate. Like, Minnesota is threatening to win the NFC North, and they compete for most of the season, but down the stretch, they sort of faltered, and as of now, they're currently the number 5 seed after losing to Detroit in the game. So, the Minnesota Vikings are probably the most exciting team to watch in the NFC. Obviously, we know how good Detroit is, and they're the favorites, but there is, however, some things to keep an eye on for, and that, of course, is Sam Darnold, who had one of his worst games at the end of the season, and he apparently tweaked his ankle in that game, so that's something to keep an eye on for, even though he was able to finish out the contest. And, for Sam Darnold, for most of his career, he hasn't lived up to the hype when he was drafted in the NFL. And right now, he is having a tremendous comeback story. So this is I want to say it's his first playoff appearance, and, we'll have to wait and see for that. Actually, he had one game in the playoffs, and that, of course, he was actually a backup quarterback in San Francisco last year, so he didn't get a chance to play. So this will be his first start in a playoff game, and there's definitely going to be a little bit of pressure from him because he's making his first start. On the other hand, you have Matthew Stafford, who has been, who has experience in the playoffs, but the Rams, they have a little bit of momentum now. They overtook the Vikings for the number 4 seed. This game will be played in Los Angeles, so I think because of the fact that the game is in Los Angeles, because of the experience of the Rams, and because the Vikings had this remarkable season, and yet the lack of their playoff expertise, this is probably going to be a game in which I could see coming down to the wire, and I think Matthew Stafford will show Sam Darnold what it means to be a quarterback in the playoffs. So, just for that, I could be wrong. As much as I would like for Minnesota to win, to maybe set up a potential dream Super Bowl matchup with the Vikings and the Bills, this is probably going to be a game in which the Los Angeles Rams should win. So, I got the top 4 teams out of the NFC meeting up in the semifinal round. Nothing too exciting about that, unfortunately. But we now move on to the AFC, and let's start with the Buffalo Bills and the Denver Broncos. Denver fans, congratulations. You are officially in the playoffs after dealing with some miserable years in which you had Russell Wilson as your quarterback, and now you have a rookie quarterback, Bo Nix, who has led the way. Sean Payton's back in the playoffs. So well done, Denver. You are in the playoffs. That's a big accomplishment for you. The bad news, though, is that you have to travel cross-country to frigid Buffalo, New York, to take on the Bills. Now, Josh Allen, who, in my personal opinion, should be considered the MVP, although you can make a case for Lamar Jackson as well. I think it's going to come down to those two. But Josh Allen has played tremendously well and for the Bills this season after they lost a tough game in Week 5 to Stephon Diggs and the Texans. A lot of people were wondering if that was going to be a lead to a momentum shifter in a negative way for the Buffalo Bills, and that has turned out to be the opposite direction. I mean, the Buffalo Bills, they always seem to find ways. You can argue that they've been the best team in the AFC all season long. And yes, they did lose in a shootout to the Rams, but that was about a month ago in December. Yet, they lost to the Patriots, but by that point, they had already clinched a spot, and then they also won a shootout game with the Lions. So I think right now, Buffalo is arguably the best team in the NFL. I know the Chiefs are still out there, and I know if you're a Bills fan, you probably want another crack at the Kansas City Chiefs, and that may come in the AFC Championship game for them. So for this particular matchup, I think Denver will get a touchdown or so, but I think Buffalo is just too strong. Playing in their field, it's going to be a hard place to play. I mean, Denver has played in cold places before, and they actually have a cold stadium, but man, it's just tough. I'm going to go with Buffalo for this one. Pittsburgh and Baltimore. Now, the AFC North surprisingly got off to a great start for the Pittsburgh Steelers, as they were the team that was in first place all throughout the AFC North. After a while, they beat the Ravens early on, but down the stretch, they sort of faltered, and the Ravens were able to start getting them back in gear, and eventually they ended up winning the AFC North division. So now the Ravens have the home field advantage against the Steelers. This is a game that's going to be very telltale. We know we know what Lamar Jackson's like in the playoffs, and certainly with the advantage that comes with it. This is a game that I feel like could be a legacy point for Lamar Jackson. If he loses this game to Pittsburgh, there's going to be continued talks about him not being able to get done in the playoffs, not being able to win in the postseason. But if he wins, it's like, okay, Lamar Jackson, won the game. Big deal. He was expected to win that game as well. But he's still got to go up against the big boys. He's still got to go up against Josh Allen. And he's still got to go up against Patrick Mahomes and win. And he hasn't been able to do that just yet. So this game, I feel like, is an opportunity for Lamar Jackson just to keep the Ravens in gear. Now, Pittsburgh, they had an opportunity to clinch and win, or the AFC North, but they let that opportunity slip away. And it's going to be really hard to say, how this one turns out. Like, it could go either way. I mean, Baltimore has the home field advantage, yes, but it could be a big factor. It could be another case of a historic Steelers-Ravens rivalry in the playoffs. And, Mike Tomlin and the Steelers, they obviously don't have some momentum going in, as they ended up losing 4 straight games, which is something very unheard of. I mean, Pittsburgh was 10-3 at one point. Now they're, 10-7, and a lot of momentum is, not in their favor as well. And teams that usually struggle down the stretch typically, are not able to get themselves, or don't usually win in the playoffs. Now, there have been a few exceptions. The New Orleans Saints being one of them. I think the Giants had a period where they kind of struggled, but then you had the Denver Broncos in '97, just to name a few teams that come to mind. But for the most part, if you struggle in the playoffs, there's the odds of you winning the whole thing are not that good. So Pittsburgh's going to have a very tall task in this sense. But I do think this is going to be, a closer game than most people anticipate. But ultimately, I still think the Ravens get the job done. So Baltimore will advance to take on Buffalo, which leaves Kansas City's opponent. And it is between my Houston Texans versus the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, this is a matchup that I think most fans in Houston probably didn't want to have, because the Chargers have kind of been a team that has threatened the Kansas City Chiefs, although this year it's been a completely different story. And, they have Justin Herbert, who is, I think has been able to refine himself as a player, and Jim Harbaugh, who's done a tremendous job getting the Chargers back to the playoffs after the abysmal season that they had. So the Chargers have a little bit of momentum going here. And this game, there's definitely some momentum on their side. They were able to win their last couple of games pretty convincingly, for that matter. Win their last 3 games. I mean, they beat Denver, they beat the Patriots, and they beat the Ravens. Teams that, they were expected to win against personally, but Now they're in a situation where they have to go down to Houston to take on the Texans. And the Texans, they started the season off well, but they kind of faltered. And even though they won the last game against the Titans, people are still thinking about the memory of the 31-9 game in which the Texans got humiliated. Or actually, I said 31-9, makes it a little closer, but 31-2 in which the Texans got humiliated by the Baltimore Ravens on Christmas Day. Definitely not a great experience. The Texans have had some injury issues, and, they were, the way the offense hasn't been clicking all season long, it's hard to really say, what the Texans can be. But here's my biggest gripe from the matchup. A lot of people have already said, well, this is an easy win for the Chargers and this and that. And look, I know the Texans haven't been playing the best football as of now, but there have been times where teams that don't play the best football in a regular season thrive and play the best football in the postseason. Is that likely to happen here? Potentially. I'm not saying it will, but I think it could potentially happen. I know that there's already been comments about people saying, well, the Chargers have a bye week, basically, and all this, and yada, 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 and then this has become the Texans' invitational wildcard game, which, look, the Texans are going to break through eventually. They will get a top seed. But at this point, they gotta earn that right. They got to figure things out. And it's a home game for the Texans, and yet they're 3-point underdogs. A lot of people seem to have some doubt on the game. And if I recall last year, the Texans were underdogs to the Cleveland Browns. Nobody thought the Texans would lose to the Browns, who had the best defense at the time. But suffice to say, that did not happen. The Browns got smacked by the Texans 45-14. C.J. Stroud had one of his best games of his career, and that's where we stand at this point. So right now, the Texans are hosting the Chargers, and it's going to be a very tough game for them. So this leads me to question, do I make the safe pick or do I take the bold pick? Play it safe, take the risk. Play it safe, take the risk. Well, screw it. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. You know what? I just want to shut people up. I'm going to say the Texans get the win. It's going to be a close win, but I think the Texans are going to get the win. So in this wild card round, I have the top 4 teams from both sides winning the wild card games and moving on. Well, actually, the number 2 through 4 seeds winning both games from both sides and advancing to the divisional round. So we'll see what happens there. So my winners for this week, I got the Bills, the Ravens, the Texans, the Rams, the Buccaneers, and the Eagles. So I could be wrong with 1, maybe 2 of them, depending on what happens here. We'll see what happens. I can't wait for Saturday. And folks, we're going to come right back to wrap it up because I just received some breaking news that I think we need to talk about. Folks, as I was talking about this podcast, I received some breaking news, and this regarding the Astros situation. Now, obviously, the Astros are kind of in a little bit of a transitional period for the team itself. The big name, of course, to keep an eye out for is Alex Bregman, who is more than likely going to sign with another team. The question is, which team is he going to go for? And there has not been any. There have been a few candidates, but nothing has stood out at this point. However, there was another player that we seem to have forgotten about, and that, of course, is Justin Verlander. Breaking news, right-hander Justin Verlander and the San Francisco Giants are in agreement on a 1-year contract pending physical. Sources tell ESPN the future Hall of Famer who turns 42 next month, who will spend his 20th season with the Giants. So, my thoughts on that. Look, I love Justin Verlander. I think he has been a tremendous pitcher. He has done everything that the Astros have asked him to do. Win a Cy Young Award, win 2 World Series, give us 2 more appearances in the Fall Classic, and it's just been a tremendous opportunity, to watch him pitch. And certainly he'll go down as one of the greatest pitchers of all time. But at this point, I think it was the right decision for him not to resign, for the Astros to resign, because clearly they got a lot of contracts they need to, fizzle out or let, loose and everything. And then, I know Jim Crane wants to keep the team winning, but right now, I don't think it would be wise to have Justin Verlander, be on the Astros at this point because he's 42 years old. He's entering his 20th season, and for him to go out, the way, to finish out his career would be something that I think would need to happen. So I do think Justin Verlander made the right decision. I think the Astros made the right decision not to resign him, and I think Verlander will be going out to San Francisco, which is a little surprising because I don't think San Francisco is in a position to contend this year, at least in the NL West. You have the Dodgers, who of course are returning as to be the World Series favorites again. The Padres seem to be a big threat in the NL West again, so you never know what could happen as well. But man, I'll tell you what, as much as I want to see the Astros win a third World Series ring, and I think it's going to happen soon. Maybe not this year, maybe in a couple of years from now or so before we get another dynasty run going. I am definitely going to miss Justin Verlander. Without him, I don't think the Astros win those 2 championships because I truly think that you needed an ace pitcher, and Verlander was that for the Astros in the years. The guy has just been a tremendous pitcher for him to watch. And, a lot of people in Houston are probably going to be saddened by this, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. I mean, Verlander, he's done it all here in Houston, and he deserves to be remembered and credited for it as well. And hopefully we'll see him in a Hall of Fame with an Astros hat on. Although I might think he might go with the MLB Hall of Fame hat as on his plaque because he had some great moments with the Tigers, but even though his better years were with the Astros in a way, I think he wouldn't do a disservice to the team that drafted him in the first place. So I do think he's probably going to put a Hall of Fame hat on his plaque. But man, I'll tell you what, cannot wait to see him, number 35 in the banners, and certainly a spot as one of the greatest pitchers in Astros history. So with that being said, Justin Verlander, obviously we're going to miss you. I mean, we missed you at the start of the 2023 season, but man, we're definitely going to miss you again. So thank you for everything that you've done. And without question, you are one of the greatest pitchers of all time, for sure. So farewell, Justin Verlander. We'll see you soon. That being said, that concludes this episode of Krocking, Locking, and Dropping. Thank you very much for tuning in, guys. Remember, you can listen to these podcasts on Spotify and Podbean, and also I upload them to my YouTube channel at KWCLINE91. And we will hopefully have another podcast episode next week where we talk about the divisional round. Hopefully I am perfect with my picks, and hopefully the Texans can shut up all the haters as far as everyone is concerned. So with that being said, I will say goodbye, so long, and I will see you guys next time on another episode of Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock.